I'm making this video about the state of film criticism and nerd culture. I may make other parts, but we'll see how it goes. It's a lot to say, so I appreciate you guys taking some time to hear me out because I think it's a pretty important topic. People often say cinema's dying, and there is a case to be made about that, but what I'm talking about is the death of film criticism. And things have changed so much over the decades. When we went to the movies, it wasn't just escapism. It was a place we could go for entertainment, but also to better understand ourselves and the world that we live in. And viewers responded well to these type of films. Whether they liked each film doesn't matter because they weren't merely consuming a product. They thought critically about what they watched. But this changed over time. People started to go to movies to only be amused, nothing else. It's not just moviegoers who change, the critics are guilty of it too. Depending on who you ask, some might say things went downhill when Star Wars came out, some might say the 80s. You could even argue Roger Ebert was responsible because he took the role of a hype man for popular movies, as opposed to being a serious thinker. Here's a clip from what I believe is one of the greatest film critics, Armin White.
Well, I do think it is fair to say that Roger Ebert destroyed film criticism. Because of the far reach, the wide and far reach of television, he became an example of what a film critic does for too many people. And what he did simply was not criticism, it was simply blather. And it was a kind of purposely dishonest enthusiasm for film's product, not real criticism at all.
Film critics online are either shills or just ignorant. They're telling you what to think instead of how to think. And like Armin White explains, most of them don't even address the real observations about what a film is attempting to say or make you feel. There's no discussion about humanism or morality. If you look at a channel like Mahler, you'll see he doesn't break down anything. All he does is a shallow consistency analysis, aka listing all the goops on IMDb of a certain film. All of his work amounts to nothing because continuity errors largely are irrelevant, especially when it requires meticulous analysis to even find them. Take a look at Red Letter Media and Chris Stuckman too. They're merely making surface level complaints, just lowbrow nitpicks.
There's a lot of tension in the movie when the main enemy forces are totally ineffective.
Lifeless, dull battle droids that can be cut in half in an instant provided absolutely no tension.
If you ask me, Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi should have been combined to form a new character called Obi-Wan Kenobi.
And in all honesty, Qui-Gon Jinn shouldn't have even been in this movie. It should have just been Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Wait, why is there a child-sized helmet and goggles in the cockpit?
But something about that scene always bothered me. He's got a child-sized helmet in the cockpit.
But we never see the Jedis run fast again. Maybe there never really was a need to run fast again. Oh, yeah, that would have been a good time.
And Obi-Wan should have totally used his speed run to go through the red blaster door area, but of course he didn't.
It's on automatic pilot!
So then George Lucas completely and utterly finally ruined Star Wars forever by having Qui-Gon explain that the Force is microscopic organisms.
Midichlorians are a microscopic life form that resides within all living cells.
This entire idea and why this is in the movie is so baffling to me that I cannot even wrap my mind around it. It was never even explored or mentioned in the following two films.
Darth Plagueis, the Dark Lord of the Sith, so powerful and so wise, he could use the Force to influence the midichlorians to create life.
And just when you thought that the Star Wars saga couldn't get any more confusing, George Lucas decided to introduce midichlorians into the mix. That's right. Apparently everyone just has little microscopic organisms floating around the inside of their bodies, and whoever listens to them correctly can understand the Force. It's not a mystical thing that binds us together with everyone in the galaxy, it's just these little organisms that live inside our body.
I want you to tell me who the main character of The Phantom Menace was.
But as you watch the movie, I challenge you to figure out who the main character of this movie is.
It's just really pathetic. These critics just parrot each other about minute details, and it's unfortunate they have the loudest voices and biggest impact. They have a huge outreach and influence millions of people, but they don't understand cinema at all or its history.
Be said about movies, about culture, about the world, that nobody's saying. And that's why I do what I do. I can only ask you to read around, read as widely as you can, and whoever you read, hold them to a standard, and don't simply, enjoy a critic because they say what you want to hear. But read as many people as you care to, but ask yourself, are they really talking about what's on the screen? Do they know the history of this form? Do they have any political awareness? Do they have any spiritual or moral or religious awareness even? And that's even if you're not a religious person, because frankly, we're living in a Western Judeo-Christian culture, and that stuff is part of our culture. I mean, it's the culture, it's part of the art that we've experienced and grown up with, and it's part of the way, it's part of our Constitution, it's part of the way we in the West think about things. So it's fair to require that of critics, as it is of filmmakers. Just, read anybody as skeptically as you read me. Don't just read to hear what you like to hear.
Now I want to address the geek culture. Recently there's been a lot of controversy happening in politics, and it's affected the industry in a big way. You had the huge Gamergate situation, and then there was the media constantly attacking white males, which created a lot of divisiveness. And because of all of this, nerds started to feel disenfranchised and demoralized. But no matter how woke Disney decided to be, the nerds just couldn't let it go.
You know what I need? That's right. More Disney Funko Pops.
They still mindlessly consume their material even though they might make 100 videos about how much Brie Larson sucks. Although Hollywood always ingrained politics in a number of their movies, it got so unsubtle and cruel it reached a point where viewers began to challenge the industry. And sites like Rotten Tomatoes began to ban people who opposed the films that had SJW or left-leaning politics. We saw this happen to Captain Marvel, The Last Jedi, the Ghostbusters remake. A lot of nerds had enough of it and boycotted the films and criticized it in mass numbers online. They were striking back against Hollywood and the media. And IMDb began to delete reviews and ratings too, just like Rotten Tomatoes, and they completely changed their system. Now you might consider this to be a good thing, and some aspects about it was fine, but the issue was that they didn't offer a good alternative. You find these same type of people asking for politics and ideology to not be placed in their entertainment, and the critics they listen to online echo the same thing, and this is a problem. Say they don't want ideology or politics included in film or games or anything at all. Now if their criticism was, hey, I don't think all of these corporations should exclusively push a narrative and people on the other end of the political spectrum should be allowed to have a voice without being blacklisted, then that'd be a good argument. I agree with that sentiment. But that's not what's happening. Almost every single one of these geek channels I looked up on YouTube expressed a desire to just be entertained. Enough politics, no more thinking.
According to my source, over the course of Friday and Saturday, a full 79.9% of people that were tuning in stopped watching at that point in the story. We are now joined by our senior ratings analyst, Harvey Cthulhu. Harvey, what do you make of these numbers?
What can I tell you, Doomcock? The people have spoken. They are sick to death of having woke crap shoved in their faces. Maybe when they watch a superhero TV show or movie, they want escapism, not more headlines ripped from CNN.
It seems to me when people subscribe to services like Disney Plus or Netflix or Hulu, they just want to be entertained, not brainwashed, not educated, not improved. Like Cyndi Lauper, they just want to have fun.
Yes, fun is awful hard to come by these days.
And that's total garbage. This is just fan criticism, not film criticism. They naively think art in the past avoided all political and religious issues. In other words, they're looking at the past through a nostalgic lens. Because when they were kids, they couldn't identify the politics in cinema, so they believe this is how it used to be. Hell, even as adults, most of them still can't recognize the political messages in the original Star Wars trilogy. These guys are not serious thinkers, and they've convinced their viewers that it's okay to watch movies even if there's no point to it. It's all just relative. Now take a look at this channel, Black Nerd Comedy, or even an account like IGN, more examples of this dorky consumerist culture. All of these channels have carefully constructed walls behind them filled with toys, or have action figures right next to them to show off to the camera. And Collider is even worse. It's buy, and buy products. So many of their products are from Disney and these soulless companies. They're essentially simps for these corporations, and it's given them a false identity. So it's to no one's surprise to find out their film reviews are vapid too. All of these people I've shown are just consumers and shills hyped for the next product, not film critics. In the end, you're going to end up swallowing this trivial nonsense because of people like Chris Stuckman, Jeremy Johns, The Quartering, and even Geeks and Gamers. And I name these particular critics because 1, they're all self-proclaimed nerds, 2, they're extremely successful content creators on YouTube, and 3, they don't all share the same politics, which means this nerd culture point I'm making isn't always a partisan issue. To be clear, someone like Stuckman will love pro-choice films, whereas someone on the right will prefer pro-life films. Biases exist, but it's not about that. See, even though some of these critics have different politics, Stuckman, who's a huge leftist, and Jeremy Johns, who seems to be apolitical, they each share the same standard as to what they consider to be good art. All of this is a disservice to art, like I've stated in my previous videos. Art is supposed to tell us what it means to be human. A good movie can make you feel lifted and inspire hope. Sure, at the end of the day, the films have to be entertaining. Nobody will care about your message if the film is just boring. But it's supposed to be so much more than what Stuckman, Black Nerd Comedy, and Jeremy Johns want it to be. Regarding The Quartering and Geeks and Gamers, they draw on the right-wing and anti-SJW viewers. I suppose it's a good thing to at least see them reject social justice messages. However, they still fail to recognize their infantile behavior toward comics and movies. And they lack some serious self-awareness.
Time this stuff gets out. This has been happening for years. Dudes can't help themselves. Now, if I look, this seems like the standard soy smile.
See, they're not any better than the other critics I've mentioned, because no matter what their political persuasion might be, it's still very consumer-oriented. For example, they'll praise films like Godzilla vs. Kong or some other kind of nonsense. They're completely okay with the idea of turning their brain off because they're just relieved to not have identity politics shoved down their throats for once. But here's my counter-argument. I don't think exhaustion is a good reason to lower your standards. See, it doesn't matter to me whether you're on the right or left or in the middle, or if you're an SJW or anti-SJW. If you're consuming products and not trying to think critically about what you're consuming, then it's a problem. So you might be asking, okay, well, what is your solution? I think it's just to think critically and understand yourself. In addition, I think it's important to be honest. As a moviegoer, that's about it. I think if you want to be a critic, you also have to know about the history of cinema, but you must have the ability to articulate your points too. But it doesn't mean you should be afraid to disagree with the popular opinion. Just don't disagree for the sake of it, right? Because that's what makes you a liar, an attention seeker, or an opportunist. Being a contrarian is an insult, and it's a term that shouldn't be thrown around because frankly there can be no dialogue once you've dismissed someone as a contrarian. And if you're a film critic or just a person who enjoys movies, don't be shy to have an original thought. Just keep in mind that that term is co-opted for use as a meaningless pejorative in order to vaguely call someone else's authenticity into question, and by extension claim authenticity for yourself. It serves no conversational function and it imparts no information, save for indicating the opinions and preferences of the speaker. Suffice it to say, no one self-identifies as a contrarian. Their term is always applied to the other, to separate the authentic us from the inauthentic them. So with that being said, I'm going to close this out with a great clip by Armin White.
We live in a culture where people don't understand what criticism is, where people have closed-minded ideas about differences of opinion, and they can't tolerate differences of opinion. And not knowing what criticism is, they don't understand that you read a critic not to agree with a critic. You read a critic to get ideas that will make you think about the work of art at hand. It's tragic that we live in a culture where people don't understand that. It's tragic where a difference of opinion is considered being contrary, whereas conformity is considered the way to be. The idea that everybody has to think alike and like the same thing, well, that's not democratic. That's almost fascist, and it's pathetic. It's in cultural terms and intellectual terms, it's a tragedy. It's a catastrophe. Our culture will only fail and shrink if people are not allowed to have a different opinion, if they're not allowed to try to work out how they respond to works of art for themselves, rather than simply trying to join a herd mentality or trying to hook up with a groupthink. That's pitiful. It's bigger than whether or not people are angry at me. It says it indicates that people don't know how to think and are not interested in thinking. And it's a pretty sad state of affairs for our educational system when you've got lots and lots of people on the internet thinking and behaving that way.